3, 2, 1. Hello everyone. Welcome to video on Geography Concepts with me Indrajeet Bariar, Faculty of Geography GS and Geography Optional at RAU'S IAS Study Center. So in today's video, we are going to learn the concept of plate tectonics with specific reference to convergent plate boundaries. So the first question, what are plates? Now plates primarily are the broken parts of lithosphere. So lithosphere being the outermost layer of the earth now that is highly brittle, and so it has broken into a number of parts or slabs, and these slabs are called as plates, and these plates are now resting on a semi-molten layer that is asthenosphere. It's a jelly-like layer. So that's where the plates are able to move on the asthenosphere. Now if we see across the world the different plates over here, the plates can be identified as major, minor based on their size, but the most important plates over here we can identify which are major plates would be North American plate, that is the first, South American plate, that is the second, Pacific plate is the third, fourth is African plate, fifth is Eurasian plate, sixth is Indo-Australian plate, and seventh is Antarctic plate. These are the major plates on the earth. Apart from that, few of the minor plates, if you see over here, the important ones include Philippine plate, Caroline plate, Arabian plate. Similarly over here, Caribbean plate we can see, Cocos plate, Nazca plate, Scotia plate, and Juan de Fuca plate. These are the most important minor plates. Along with that, here of course you can see these Fiji plate or Bismarck plate. So these are basically the plates that are found on the earth. Now these plates, when move on asthenosphere, they interact with each other, and this interaction is what gives rise to plate tectonics. So if we see the possibilities of plates interacting, the plates can interact. So suppose these are the two plates, so these plates can interact either as moving towards each other, okay, which I'll call as convergence, or they can be moving away from each other, which I can call as divergence, or they can rub against each other like this, and this is what I'll call as the transform plate boundary, which is going to move like this. So convergence, divergence, and rubbing against each other, transform plate boundary. So today we are going to take a look at the convergence. Now when the convergence of the plates happen, what phenomena will happen and what features would be forming, that will depend on what type of crust is interacting. Let's say now the crust, we are going to divide it into oceanic crust, continental crust. And over here, with respect to oceanic crust and continental crust, the primary difference over here, if you see, would be the oceanic crust, I will show by OC, and continental crust, that is CC. So in this case, the basic differences, if I take a look over here, what I'll find is, most importantly, that is oceanic crust is basaltic in nature, whereas continental crust is granitic, or what we also identify as andesitic in nature, which gives rise to another very important property, that is oceanic crust is dense and heavy, whereas the continental crust is lighter. This is the difference in the property that we are going to use heavily in the plate tectonics. So now let's say when the convergence is taking place, okay, the phenomena would depend upon whether it is OC or CC, oceanic crust or continental crust. And so over here, what I can get would be the convergence. So convergence over here, we can identify as three possible combinations. Either the case can be that the two oceanic crusts are converging, two oceanic crusts are interacting with each other, which let's call as OC-OC convergence, oceanic crust convergence. Or another possibility is one oceanic crust is converging with another continental crust, so it becomes OC-CC convergence, or one continental crust converging with another continental crust, that becomes CC-CC convergence. So these are the three possibilities, the three possible combinations with respect to what type of crust is interacting when and where the convergent plate boundaries are concerned. So let's take a look at these one by one. The first, when we are talking about the OC-OC convergence. Now OC-OC convergence primarily, so OC-OC convergence. Now in case of OC-OC convergence, these are two different oceanic crusts converging, and so let's say there is this one oceanic crust and there is another oceanic crust, and here we are assuming the oceanic portion. So the oceanic crust, two oceanic crusts converging over here. Now as the oceanic crusts converge, so there is this convergence taking place over here. Now these oceanic crusts converging, the convergence is going to happen like this, and in this case whichever oceanic crust is heavier. Now heavier here would be determined by the age of the rocks. Okay, whichever would be the older crust, that would be considered as heavier. So let's say this one is heavier, which means this one is the old crust. And so when the convergence is going to happen, the convergence happens like this, and whichever is heavier one, that is forced down like this. So this crust remains here only, and this crust is forced down in this manner. In the diagram, if I have to show it, I can show this crust to be forced down like this. Now this process is what we call as subduction. So we can say that, let's name it as crust Y and crust X. So I'll say that crust X is subducting underneath crust Y. Now as this subduction happens, over here what I can observe would be a depression that would be formed over here. And this depression now is something what we call as trench. So there would be a trench formation over here. In addition to that, as the slab, as the crust X is forced down towards the mantle, the temperature is constantly increasing, and at certain depth what may happen is this crust may melt. So as the crust melts over here, it forms what we can call as lava chamber. Now this lava, when formed over here, if it finds some weak spot above it, then this lava rises up, comes out over here in the form of volcanic eruption, and so forms over here what can be seen as a volcanic mountain. So this volcanic mountain formed by the erupting lava over here, and this volcanic mountain when formed, and when it comes above the sea level, if it comes above the sea level, then this is what we can call as volcanic island. This is what happens with respect to the OC-OC convergence. So over here, effectively, the OC-OC convergence has resulted in, first of all, subduction, formation of trench, and then formation of volcanic island. And this would be taking place all along the length of the plate, and so this primarily forms what we call as volcanic island arcs. Then second type of convergence now is what we can identify as OC-CC convergence. Now OC-CC convergence, one oceanic crust interacting with another continental crust. So what we will do is, first we are going to take up a continental crust. Continental crust is always thicker, oceanic crust is thin. So we will show it like continental crust, oceanic crust. Again, X and Y. Now when the convergence takes place here, in this case, now what is going to happen? There is one oceanic crust, there is one continental crust. Now out of these, which one is heavier? Yes, we have seen earlier, oceanic crust is basaltic, it is heavier. So very obviously, continental crust being lighter, oceanic crust being heavier, the same process is going to happen. That is, oceanic crust would be pushed down. Oceanic crust being pushed down, this again would be called as subduction only. And the diagram would pretty much look like this. Again, this is the process which I am going to call as subduction. Now in this case, what is going to happen? Again, I can see over here, there is a depression that is being formed, and this is again what I will call as a trench. That's the first concept. Apart from that, exactly the same argument, that is the OC is subducting. And so the OC subducting over here is again going to melt here and we again come up over here, resulting in the form or resulting in the volcanic eruption over here. So the volcanic eruption on the continental side, this is what is going to happen over here. But in addition to that, what is going to happen is, as the subduction happens, here I have a continental crust, here I have an oceanic crust, and you can see in between that there is a depression. Now first thing, this depression is filled up by the sediments brought by rivers from over the land. So there is these sediments that are filling up the trench. So there is this filling of sediments that is taking place over here. In addition to that, now what can happen is, as these crusts are subducting like this, okay. So suppose this is continental crust, this is oceanic crust, and the subduction is happening. As this subduction happens, there is a lot of friction over here, lot of rubbing at this part. So at here, which is the trench portion, there is a lot of friction that is happening, and due to this friction rubbing, parts of the continental crust and parts of the oceanic crust, the rocks break over here, and these rocks which have broken due to the rubbing, that also deposits in the trench only. So trench is a depression over here. The rubbing happens between the two plates, and this rubbing leads to breaking of rocks from here, breaking of rocks from here, and that also deposits in the trench only, filling up the trench eventually. As this material has been filled over here, this material now is called as accretionary prism. Now this accretionary prism definitely would be a mix of different types of rocks. Okay, it would be having basaltic rocks from oceanic crust, it would be having andesitic rocks from the continental crust, or the granitic rocks from the continental crust. So this is a mix of what we are calling as accretionary prism. And now, so you can see that whole of the trench is now filled up with this material. Now what is going to happen? We see that the compressive force are acting here, and these compressive force ultimately are going to, so this is the case, and the compression when happens, this compression leads to a phenomena like this. So there is this compression and folding, what we call as folding. So due to the compression, the folding happens, the folds are uplifted later, and that is effectively now what I can identify as the fold mountain formation. So there is this fold mountain formation along mountain. This definitely is conditional now. That is, if enough of the accretionary prism is deposited in the trench, then a fold mountain will come out of it. If not, then the trench remains there. So this is what happens in the OCCC convergence. And then the next one that I have is the CCCC convergence. So the next one, that is CCCC convergence. Now in CCCC convergence, there would be two continental crusts, one continental crust, another continental. Both are continental crusts. There is a convergence that is happening. So with this convergence, what happens is there are two continental crusts. Now continental crusts are very light, so they cannot subduct. It's pretty much like you can imagine a plastic block floating in water. A plastic block floating in water, you can forcefully push it down, but the moment you leave it, it will pop up. So a plastic block is not going inside the water now. Exactly the same case, because the density of continental crust is less than that of mantle or the material of asthenosphere, it always keeps floating. So continental crust can never subduct. So now what is going to happen? You have two continental crusts, they are pushing into each other, but none can subduct. So first what happens is there is slipping like this. So the two crusts which are there, they slip like this, forming two layers, one and another. This is the phenomena what we call as abduction. Earlier process was subduction, going into the mantle. Here now it will be abduction, and abduction would look something like this. So abduction looking like this, here you can see one and another crust in this section. This is abduction zone, and with this abduction I find one layer over another, and this is the phenomena that we call as the doubling of crust. So crust doubles over here, doubling of crust. Now with this, definitely the friction is very high, so this cannot go on forever. Rather what will happen is, it will abduct slightly, but as the area of contact is increasing, friction is increasing. So at one point of time it cannot further slide, and so it locks like this. As it locks over here, pretty much like this, so it was the case, it was abducting, locks. Now after this it cannot go further, so it has locked now. Now after this, when further the forces are applied, it results in the same phenomena, that is folding. So again folding happens. And so after abduction, the next thing that is going to be happening over here would be the folding, and hence again the formation of fold mountains over here. So CCCC convergence also leads to folding or the formation of fold mountains. But over here there is one basic difference that I can very easily see in the fold mountains that have been formed due to OCCC convergence and another that has been formed due to CCCC convergence. Now what is going to happen in OCCC convergence, this whole thing has resulted in formation of huge fold mountains, and along with that here subduction is also taking place. So what may happen and what is going to happen is these fold mountains will have or may experience volcanism also. So any fold mountain formed due to OCCC convergence will exhibit volcanism, whereas over here in the case of CCCC convergence there is no subduction. No subduction means no magma formation and hence no volcanism. So here volcanism is not going to happen. So that's one basic difference in these two different fold mountains formed by two different processes effectively. That is, the fold mountains as a result of OCCC convergence is going to exhibit volcanism, whereas the one formed due to CCCC convergence is not going to exhibit volcanism or would be free from volcanism. These are the three basic types of convergent plate boundary interaction and what happens in which case. So over here what we can see with the convergent boundaries, plates are moving towards each other, creates subduction zones, destroys crust due to melting and deforms. And three types of convergent boundaries: ocean continent, continent continent and ocean ocean. So in this case, now if we take a look at the overall convergent plate boundary, this convergent plate boundary, you can see the convergence taking place in this manner. So now let's take some examples, few examples of where all this type of convergence is taking place on the earth. So overall, when we see the first thing, I'll go back to the plate map, and in the plate map the first type of convergence that I see, OC-OC convergence, and one very important OC-OC convergence is taking place between Pacific plate and the Philippine plate. So between Pacific plate and the Philippine plate, the interaction that I see, Pacific plate, Philippine plate, they are moving towards each other, and the Pacific plate over here is subducting. As the Pacific plate is subducting, there is this trench that has been formed over here, and this is a very popular trench everyone knows about. Okay, this is called as the Mariana Trench. So Mariana Trench has been formed over here, and Pacific plate is subducting underneath the Philippine plate, and that's where towards the west of Mariana Trench you have Mariana Islands, which are nothing but the volcanic islands. That's the first example. Second example, that is OCCC convergence. Now in case of OCCC convergence, a popular one can be the Nazca plate converging with the South American plate. So Nazca plate converging with the South American plate, the OCCC convergence has led to formation of fold mountains over here, which are Andes. Similar to that, the Pacific plate and North American plate converging has led to formation of again fold mountain ranges that are the Rocky Mountains. So these are the fold mountains that have been formed due to OCCC. You can see oceanic crust, Nazca plate, CEC, South American plate. Similarly, continental crust of North American plate, oceanic crust of Pacific plate, OCCC convergence. And the third one, that is CCCC convergence, and a very popular one that you can see here would be the Indian plate or part of Indo-Australian plate converging with the Eurasian plate. And this particular type of movement has given rise again to fold mountains over here, which are Himalayas. So Himalayas have been formed due to CC-CC convergence. And now you can see the difference. When I talk about Rocky, when I talk about Andes, they exhibit volcanism. So take for example, Rocky Mountains have Mount Rainier. It's a volcano, active volcano. Similarly, South America, the Andes have Mount Cotopaxi. These are volcanoes, active volcanoes, where because they have been formed due to OCCC convergence. On the other hand, when you talk about Himalayas, this part, they are rather free from volcanism. Free from volcanism because they are CC-CC convergent boundary. So effectively, in this case, now when we talk about these plate boundaries, to summarize it, what we can say is there are three types of convergent plate boundaries. The first one, that is OC, second one OC-CC, and third one, that is CC-CC convergent plate boundary. Over here, the diagram for the three, first of all, if I want to draw the diagram for the three, in the first case, I'll draw it pretty much like OC, subduction, melting, and trench. So this is the diagram. Second one for OCCC, I'll show CC over here, so OC subduction over here, again melting, volcanic eruption. In addition to that, here we have cold mounting. And the third one, that is CC-CC convergence, abduction and cold mounting. And along with that, the basic features, if I have to write over here, the basic features with respect to OC, the first thing we are going to write is subduction. The second aspect is the formation of trench over here. Along with that, volcanic island formation. And in addition to that, the example over here we will put as Mariana Trench. Mariana Trench, that is Pacific Plate and Philippines. So these would become the example of OC-OC convergence. Then when we move on to the CC-CC convergence, OCCC convergence, in OCCC convergence we can mention first of all subduction again. So subduction taking place over here. Along with that, volcanism will happen over. In addition to that, cold mountains can form over here or trenches can be formed. And again, in this case, the example that we are going to put would be Rocky Mountains and Andes. Rocky Mountains would be Pacific Plate with the North American Plate, and the Andes mountain now would be the South American Plate. So South American Plate with Nazca Plate. This becomes the OCCC convergence, and the third aspect that becomes now the CCCC convergence. And with respect to CCCC convergence, now again I'll write over here, instead of subduction, I'll write over here abduction. So abduction taking place over here. Along with that, the phenomena is doubling of crust, or this is also called as the thickening of the crust. And in addition to that, the fold mountain formation. And the example that I'm going to take over here would be Himalayas. So Himalayas formation and Himalayas formation, I'll say Himalayas formation with respect to Indian plate and Eurasian plate. So these are three different types of plate interactions, the convergent plate boundary interaction. So that's it for today's lecture. Hope the video proves useful for you. I'll meet you in next video. Till then, everyone, take care.